We're now at Dante the Pilgrim in Ante-Purgatory, the sort of purgatorial waiting room. And Dante runs into a couple of very interesting characters, and I'm going to talk in this segment about two of them. The first one is a guy named Manfred. And Manfred is a Ghibelline commander, a warrior, a guy who was actually killed in battle, killed in 1266 in the Battle of Benevento. And Manfred, it turns out, was also the son of the Emperor Frederick II. Now, you might remember Frederick II is in the circle of the heretics in hell. So we have, from Dante, this very interesting phenomenon. Families aren't all in the same place. Frederick is in hell. His son Manfred is evidently in purgatory. But what makes this kind of a puzzle is that Manfred himself has been doing many, if not most, of the bad things that Frederick was doing. In fact, we read in the footnotes that this is a guy who apparently is said to have murdered his brother Conrad and two of his nephews, and tried to murder another nephew. This is a guy who killed a lot of people on the battlefield. So let's look at what happens in Dante's description. Here's Dante in the outer portals of purgatory, and he sees this man, a handsome patrician he was, although a sword wound cut through one eyebrow. So you can see a gash right on his face. And then Dante says, when I confessed I did not recognize him, he said, look, and he revealed a gash above his breast. Now, here's something interesting, because if we think back to Dante in hell, people in hell kind of demand to be recognized. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know who my ancestors are? But notice here, you've got a very important man, Manfred, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor. And when Dante doesn't recognize him, he doesn't really mind. He instead bares his breast and shows a big gash on his chest. And now back to the text. Then with a smile he said, Manfred I am. And for centuries, really, scholars have talked about this Manfredian smile, because Dante gives no explanation at all as to why Manfred is smiling. And a number of scholars have pointed out, and I agree with this, that Manfred is smiling because he's saying to Dante, you know what, you probably didn't expect to find me here. Guess what? This is a big surprise. I was just as much of a bad guy as Frederick. But I made it, and I'm happy I made it. And that's why I'm grinning, and that's why I'm smiling. And then Manfred tells us what happened. He's on the battlefield. He's dying. Quote, as I lay there, my body torn by these two mortal wounds, weeping, I gave my soul to him who grants forgiveness willingly. Horrible was the nature of my sins, but boundless mercy stretches out its arms to any man who comes in search of it. So there it is. What differentiates people in purgatory is repentance. And repentance is available to all who seek it. And then Manfred says something very interesting. He says, the church's curse is not the final word, for everlasting love may still return if hope reveals the slightest hint of green. Now, what Manfred is referring to here is the fact that he had been excommunicated by the Pope. The Pope threw him out of the church. And Dante, for one, does not believe that excommunication is meaningless. Yeah, if you're excommunicated, you are in fact severed from, you may say, the body of Christians on the earth. You are thrown out, and Manfred was. But, says Dante, and this is a critical point, that while excommunication can deprive you of the fellowship of fellow Christians on earth, at least in Dante's view, it doesn't deprive you of the fellowship of the saints in heaven. In other words, it doesn't have that kind of a power. If Manfred repents, as he does, you know what? He has to go through purgatory because he does have to be purged, but at the same time, he is on his way, inevitably, to heaven. Let's turn now to the other guy that we find pretty much in the same part of the comedy, of the Purgatorio. And this guy's name is Buonconte Montefeltro. Now, if this strikes a little bit of a chord, rings a bell, it should, because this guy, Buonconte, is the son of a guy we talked about in Inferno, Guido da Montefeltro, one of the fraudsters, one of the false counselors. And with Buonconte, his story very similar to Manfred. He says he's on the battlefield. He was actually fighting for Arezzo against Florence. He gets killed in a battle that actually restores the Guelphs to power in Florence. And here's Buonconte talking. He goes, I made my way, my throat an open wound, fleeing on foot. There I went blind, I could no longer speak. But he goes, but as I died, I murmured his name, which is to say God's name. And then something really quite remarkable happens, which is, he now says, God's angel took me up, and hell's fiend cried, Oh, you from heaven, why steal what is mine? Now, if you think about this, this is a beautiful Dante-esque inversion, because if you remember with Guido da Montefeltro, St. Francis came down to get Guido's soul, and at the last minute, the devil showed up and go, leave him alone, he's mine. And he snatches Guido and takes him down to hell. Here it's the exact opposite. Here, you have Buonconte, a bad guy, and the devil is waiting to get him. But because he repented at the last moment, even though his throat was slashed, because he reached out to God, at the last minute, it's not the devil, but God's angel comes down and goes, basically, this one is mine. And then the devil is angry and gnashes his teeth and goes, oh, you from heaven, why steal what is mine? Dante, once again, through this kind of beautiful parallelism, making the point that what distinguished Guido from Buonconte isn't that one was a good guy and one was a bad guy. They were really both bad guys in their lives. They both committed a lot of sins. The difference? Guido tried to outwit God, and to think it could have worked. Buonconte didn't do that. He reached out to God, and that alone made all the difference.